Hello, and welcome to episode 36 of Dark Academia Queen. Today we're going to be discussing the life of Lewis Carroll. As he once said, if you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. I grew up on the Alice in Wonderland series and all of that, so um, he was like one of my favorite children's author growing up and everything. But he is most known for his being author of children's books, including the famous Alice in Wonderland series. And though the author was autistic and experienced speech and disorder and partial deafness, um, he channeled his imagination through writing and brought out joy in so many children. Now, Corral was born Charles Ludwig Dodgson on January 27, 1832. He died January 14, 1898. He was an English poet, author, and mathematician and photographer. He is most known, like I said, for his Alice in Wonderland books. He was noted for his facility with wordplay, logic, and fantasy. He came from a family of high church Anglicans and developed a long relationship with the Christ Church, Oxford. Alice Liddell is rightly identified as the original inspiration for Alice in Wonderland series. But Carroll denied these claims. He was an avid puzzler and published in his weekly columns for Vanity Fair magazines between 1879 and 1881. In 1982, there was a memorial stone to Carroll that was unveiled at the Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. Now, his early life. What do we know about his early life? Well, he was predominantly Northern English conservative and a high church Anglican. Most of his ancestry were either army officers or clergymen, and his great grandfather risen through the ranks to become Bishop of Elfrin and Royal Island. His paternal grandfather, whose name was also Charles, was an army captain who was killed in action in Ireland in 1803. He was then sent to Westminster School and then Church Christ, Oxford. He went to he reverted to his his family tradition into holy orders, and he was really good at math. He was really gifted in it. He won a double first degree, and which could eventually pollute him to become a real brilliant academic career. Instead, he chose to become a country parson. Now, he was born on January 27, 1832, in an All Saints Vicarage in Darthrey, Cheshire, the oldest boy and the third oldest of 11 children. And he was 11. When he was 11, his dad was given Crofton Tees, Yorkshire. We're living in Crofton Tees, Yorkshire. And the family moved to a spacious factory, and this remained a home for the next 25 years. Now, his father was highly active, and a conservative cleric for the Church of England, who later became the Archdeacon for Richmond, and involved himself, sometime influentially, in the intense religious disputes that were dividing the church, and he was a high church inclining due to Anglo-Catholicism. Can't believe I actually pronounced that right. That word usually throws me for a loop. But he was an admirer of John Henry Newman and the Tractarian movement, and he did his best to instill such views for his children. However, I'm going to go Lewis Carroll because that's what we know him as. That's what he went by. That was his pseudonym. Carroll developed an ambient relationship with his father and the Church of England as a whole. Now, during his early youth, he was educated at home. His reading lists were preserved in the family's archive to testify to a precocious intellect. And at the age of 7, he was reading books such as The Pilgrim's Progress. He was also spoke with a stammer, a condition that was shared by most of his siblings, and it was often had to his social life through the years. At the age of 12, he was sent to Richmond Grammar School in Richmond, Yorkshire. So in 1846, he entered a rugby school where he evidently was unhappy, and he wrote some years after leaving that he could not say how much he hated it and everything. He did not claim to suffer from bullying, but he cited little boys and the main targets were the older boys bullies at rugby. Now, Stuart Dawson Collingswood, his nephew, wrote, even though it was hard for to have only known him for a gentle and retiring Don to believe it, it is nevertheless true that long after he left the school, his name was remembered as the boy who knew well how to use his fist in defense of righteous cause, and which is the protection of the smaller boys. Now, scholastically, though, he excelled with apparent ease. Thank you, Reese. My roommate stalled. Yes. She does not believe he excels scholastically. Is that right, girl? She's like, I'm over this. I'm gonna go back to sleep now. Um, but anyway. so, but he observed mathematics by Master R.E. Mayer and Francis Walkingames, the tutor assistant, being a Caponian arithmetic, um, still survives, and it contains an inscription of Latin which translates, "This book belongs to Charles Lutheran Dawson, hands off." Now, some pages also have annotation, such as the one front found and everything. Now he left rugby in 1849, and he was at the University of Oxford in May 1850, and as a member of the father's old college, Christ Church, and after waiting for rooms in the college to become available, he went into residence in January 1851, and he had been at Oxford for only 2 days when he received a summons home. His mom has died from an inflammation in the brain, and this is now we probably know as meningitis or stroke, when she was only 47. His academic career veered between high promise and irresistible distraction. He did not always work hard, but was exceptionally gifted in achievement and came easily into him. He obtained a first-class honors in mathematics moderation and soon afterwards nominated to the studentship by his father by his old friend Canon Edward Posey. In 1854, he obtained the first class honors and the finals honors of School of Mathematics, standing on the list, and thus graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts. He retained at Christ Church studying and teaching, but the next year he fell to an important scholarship exam, though his self-confessed inability to apply himself to study. Even so, his talents in mathematician won him the Christchurch Mathematical Lectureship in 1855, when he continued to hold, one he would continue to hold for the next 26 years. And despite early unhappiness, he remained at the Church of Christ in various capacities until his death, including a librarian in the Christ Church Library, where where his office was often new to the deanery where Alice Little lived. It's not going to be the first time we hear that name, just a heads up. Now, let's talk about his health problems. Let's see. He was about 6 feet. He was tall, slender, had curly brown hair, blue eyes, blue gray eyes. Now, he was also described later in life as somewhat asymmetrical and carrying himself rather stiffly and awkwardly. And although this might be an account of the knee injury sustained in the middle age, as a very young child, he suffered a fever that left him deaf in one ear. And at the age of 17, he suffered a severe attack of the whooping cough, which was probably a response to a chronically weak chest in his early life. In his early childhood, he did have a stammer, which was referred to his hesitation and remained in life. The stammer had always been a significant part of the image for him. And while one of the stories, while one inventive story says that he stammered only as an adult in company. He was free and fluent with children. There is no evidence to support this idea, but many children of his acquaintance remembered his stammer, while many adults failed to notice it. And Dodgson himself seems to have been far more acutely aware of this more with more adults he met, and it seemed that he curated himself as the Dodo in Alice in Wonderland, referring to his difficulty in pronouncing his last name. But also is one of the many supposed facts that was repeated, which no first-hand evidence has shown. He is indeed referred to himself as a dodo, but whether or not this reference was to his stammer it's just simply speculation. Now, Dodgson, his scammer, did trouble him, but it was never so debilitating that it prevented him from applying his personal qualities to the well in society. He lived in a time where people commonly devised them for their own amusement, and singing and recitation were required by social skills. And a young Charles um, was well equipped to be engaging and entertainer. He could reportedly sing at a passable level and was not afraid to do so before an audience. He was also adept in mimicry and storytelling and reputedly quite good at charades. Now, in the interim between his early publishing writings and his success in Alice books, he began to work as a Raphaelite social circle. Um, and this was where he first met John Ruskin in 1857. He would become friends with him. In around 1863, he developed a close relationship with Dante Gabriel Rossetti and his family. He also would often take pictures of the family and garden of the Rossetti house in Chelsea, London. He also knew William Holman Hunt, John Everett Marliles, and Arthur Hughes, among other artists. He knew fairy tale author George MacDonald, and it was enthusiastic reception of Alice by the young MacDonald child that persuaded him to work for the publication. Now, this basically means he traditionally has been regarded as a politically religious and personally conservative man. Martin Gardner labels him as a Tory who is awed by the lures and inclined to be snobbish toward inferiors. William Tuckwell regarded him as an austere, shy, precise, absorbed in mathematicals Riviere, watchfully tenacious in his dignity, um, stiffly conservative in political, theological, and social theories. And his life mapped out squares like Alice's landscape. Now, Dodgson also was ordained deacon in the Church of England on December 22nd in 1861. In his Life and Letters of Lewis Carroll, the editor states um, that his diary is full of such modest deprecations of many as well. Now, he expressed interest in other fields, and he was an early member of the Society for Psychiatrical Research, and which one of his letters suggests that he had accepted as he was taught reading. Now, Carrel wrote some studies in various philosophical arguments. In 1899, he developed a philosophical regressive argument in deductive reasoning, an article. What are some of his artistic activities? Well, from a young age, he wrote poetry and short stories, contributing heavily to the family's magazine, Michigan, and later sending stories to various magazines enjoying his success. Between 1851 and 1856, his works appeared in national publications as well. So the Comic Times, in the train, as well as smaller magazines such as Whitley Gazette and Oxford Critic. Most of his output was humorous and sometimes satirical, but his standards were ambitious and extracting. In March 1856, he published his first piece of work under a name that would make him famous. This was Romantic Solitude that appeared in a tale under authorship Lewis Carroll. The pseudonym was played on his real name Lewis, and was anglicized to from in the form of Ludovicus, which was Latin for Luttridge, and Carroll is an Irish surname similar to the Latin Corellis, for which would come from Charles. The transition went as follows: Charles Luttridge transitioned his name. Now, there are many this was many translated to English as Carell Lewis. However, it makes the reverse Lewis Carroll, and the pseudonym was chosen by either Edmund Yates from a list of four submitted by Dodson, or and the others being Edgar Corrales, Edgar U.C. West, and Louis Carroll. Let's talk about the Alice books now. These are perhaps what he is most known for. In 1856, Dean Henry Little arrived at the Christchurch in Oxford, bringing with him his young family, all of whom he figured was largely in his life. Following the years and would greatly influence his writing career, he became close with Lyra's wife, Lorena, and their young children, particularly the three sisters, Lorena, Edith, and Alice. He was widely assumed by many to have derived his own Alice from Alice Little. In the acrostic poem at the end of Through the Looking Glass spells out her name in full, and there are many superficial references hidden in the context of the books. It has been noted that Dodson himself repeatedly denied this later in his life that his little heroine was based on a real child, and he frequently dedicated his work to the girls of his acquaintances, adding the names to acrostic poems. Beginning in the text, Gertrude Chataway's names appeared in the form of the beginning of The Hunting of the Snark. It is suggested that this means that many of his characters in the narrative are based on her. Now, information is scarce, but it seems clear that his friendship with the Liddell family was an important part of his life in the late 1850s, as he grew up in the habit of taking the children on rowing trips. Accompanied by his adult friend to nearby Newton, Galstow. And it was on such expedition on July 4th, 1862, that Corell invented the outline of the story. This dog is gonna drive me crazy, but I love her. Um, but he told the story of Alice Liddell, and she begged him to write it down. And he eventually presented herself as handwritten illustrated manuscript of Alice in Wonderland. Now, before the family of a friend mentor, Judge George MacDonald, read his incomplete manuscript, and the enthusiasm of MacDonald's children encouraged him to seek publication. In 1863, he had taken the unfinished manuscript to Macmillan, the publisher, who liked it immediately. And after the possibility alternative, there was titles were rejected: Alice Among the Fairies and Alice's Golden Hour. The work was finally published as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in 1865 under the Lewis Carroll pen name, in which he used some 9 years earlier. The illustrations this time were by Sir John Tenniel, and Carell evidently thought that a published book would need the skills of a professional artist. Annotated versions would provide him with ideas of meaning that are prevalent to these books. Critical literatures are often proposed by his interpretations of the book as a descent into the dark world of subconscious, as well as seeing it as a satire among contemporary mathematical advances. Now, the overwhelming comical success of the Alice books changed him in many ways, and the fame of his alter ego, Lewis Carroll, soon spread among the world. And it was flooded with fan mail and with sometimes unwanted attention. But one of the most popular was Queen Victoria herself enjoyed Alice in Wonderland so much that she commanded that he dedicate his next book to her, which was accordingly represented in his next work in a scholarly mathematical volume of the elementary treatise of Dormitus, and Carell voluntarily denied his story as well. She is sleeping heavy over there. It was late in 1871 that he published a sequel, Through the Looking Glass, and what Alice found there. Now, what about the hunting of the Snark? Well, in 1876, he would produce his next great work, The Hunting of the Snark, a fantastical nonsense poem with allusions by Henry Holiday exploring the adventures in a bizarre crew of 9 tradesmen in a beaver. It has received largely mixed reviews from Carell and contemporary viewers, but was enormously popular, with the public having found his temporary reviewers, but it was enormously popular with the public. Having been reprinted 17 times between 1876 and 1908, it has seen various adaptations. What about Sylvie and Bruno? Well, in 1895, 30 years after the publication, um, he would come back with a 2-volume tale of the fairy siblings, Sylvie and Bruno. And he would entwine 2 plots set in 2 alternate worlds, one in rural England and the other in the fairy tale kingdoms in Effland, Outland. And the fairy tale would satirize English society and make meaning. Now, let's talk about his photography now. In 1856, he took part in a new art of photography under the influence of Skeffington Luttridge, and later his Oxford friend Reginald Southey. Now, he also soon had excellence in the art and became well known as a gentleman photographer, and is seen to have toyed with the idea of making a living out of this. Now, the study of Roger Taylor and Edwin Weckling exhaustively lists the surviving print, and Taylor calculates just over his surviving children and depicts 30 years surviving photographs of nude or semi-nude children. And about 60% of his original photograph portfolio was deliberately destroyed. And he also made many studies of men, women, and boys' landscapes. He also was the subject to many, including skeletons, dolls, dogs, and many paintings throughout the trees. Now, he also found photography to be a useful entree into higher social circles during the most productive part of his career, in which he made portraits of notable sitters such as John Everett Marshall, Ellen Terry, Maggie Spearman, and so on. Now, by the time he stopped photography very abruptly, might I add. He established his own studio at the roof of 10 Quad, created 3,000 images, and became an amateur master in the medium with fewer than 1,000 images to have survived as well.